Hello everyone, this is Aaron from MTGChallengers, and welcome to my Naya Dinosaurs deck tech for Ixalan Standard. Honestly, this is one of my favorite decks I've ever built. The interesting thing about this is that I didn't actually set out initially to build a dinosaur tribal deck. I really just wanted to build a traditional Naya midrange deck to showcase all the great new value creatures from Ixalan, but in looking over the spoiler, I realized that pretty much all of the good big creatures in white, red, and green were dinosaurs, so I ended up building around that. Basically what this is a ramp deck that revolves around playing early creatures that either produce mana or make the dinosaurs cost less, to be able to block against the aggro decks and then just take over the game with dinos by turn 4 or 5. So the first card I have is Kinjali's Collar, 4 copies of it. Definitely the ideal turn 1 play. It comes down, effectively accelerates us, lets us cast our dinosaurs earlier, and 3 toughness makes it a really solid blocker up against aggro decks like red deck wins. Next up, I have a playset of Drover of the Mighty, another accelerant. Actually taps for real mana, and it fixes really well. And the pump ability can be really nice. The ideal play is to drop this turn 2, and then play Jaw Raptor turn 3. All the better if you were able to drop the Collar turn 1, since you only need 3 mana for the Raptor then, and the Drover will be an untapped 3/3 ready to swing in, or hold back as a blocker. 7 power on turn 3 is exactly where this deck wants to be. The last piece of the acceleration package comes in the form of 4 Otepic Huntmasters. Another fine card. 2 toughness isn't quite as good as a blocker, but it still can block a decent bit of aggro creatures, and it also combos really well with the Raptor since you can drop the Raptor turn 3 and then give it haste. Overall, I really like the options for mana acceleration this set has provided for this deck. Each one does really well, and each have their own strengths and abilities that can be exploited depending on the situation. And they're also all humans, which, as you'll see later on, comes in handy. Now we move on to the bulk of this dinosaur deck, the dinosaurs. First up, as I've mentioned before, Jaw Raptor, a playset of him. I actually wasn't going to include him at first, but in testing and thinking about it, the deck really does need a 4-drop dino to be able to really take advantage of all the acceleration, and I really underestimated his ability at first. It's great because they won't want to block him unless they have to, and when they do, you'll draw a card and most likely kill their creature, and it also discourages them from swinging in, since I can decide to block with him and draw a card that way as well. It also makes burning him out a much less attractive option, and it also combos quite nicely with another dinosaur in this deck, which I'll get to in a bit. Next, I have 3 Charging Monstrosaur. A damn solid dino that a lot of people seem to be overlooking a bit. It doesn't have many abilities, but it doesn't need them. 5 power for 5 mana that tramples over the turn it comes into play is just great. And as you've probably noticed, we most likely will not actually be paying 5 mana for him. Also, the less intensive mana cost can be nice if you're having a bit of trouble with your sources. Then I have 4 copies of Regisaur Alpha. This card is completely insane. I mean, you get 7 power, 3 of it tramples for 5 mana, and again in this deck, most likely less than that, and it gives all your other dinos haste. Definite 4 of, just another value-packed creature for this deck. Raging Swordtooth as a 3 of rounds out the 5-drop dinosaurs. 5 trampling power for 5 is already very solid, but dealing damage to other creatures is fantastic. Especially up against aggro, 1 damage to each creature is going to wipe out a decent bit most likely, and even if it doesn't, remember damage is marked on creatures and lasts for an entire turn. So another trampling dinosaur will be able to push through more damage to the opponent. The Enter the Battlefield trigger can also be good for us. 1 damage won't kill any of our accelerants, and it will let us draw more cards with the Raptor. And now we get into the big finishers of the deck. 4 Carnage Tyrant is amazing. 7 trampling power, will resolve, and will not be removed by anything short of a board wipe. And if he gets haste, which is quite easy for this deck to do with the Huntmaster and the Alpha, they lose. There's just almost no way of coming back from that. And finally, we have the finisher of all finishers, Gishath Sun's Avatar, 2 of him. That mana cost in the late game with all of our accelerants is not going to be a problem. It has haste, vigilance, trample, and that ability, if you resolve him, much like the Carnage Tyrant, your opponent coming back is probably not going to happen. It's just amazing. So that concludes all the creatures in the deck. Pretty awesome stuff. Just have a few non-creature spells to complement the build. I have another new card from Ixalan here, a Huatli Warrior Poet. Honestly, one of the better planeswalkers I've seen in my time playing Magic. Every single ability is good, relevant in just about any game state, and can be used the turn she comes into play. Her +2 is fine for getting some life gain against the aggressive decks. You'll usually be gaining at least 4 or 5 life, since this will almost always be coming down after you've cast some dinosaurs. Her 0 ability does a great job of protecting her and giving you an able-bodied creature to attack or block with, and it will often swing in the turn it comes into play with the other cards we have that give haste to dinosaurs. It also lets you build a board presence back up after a Wrath, or if you're a bit behind on creatures compared to your opponent. And her ultimate might be my favorite, just to be able to ping their whole board, disable them for a turn, and then alpha for the win. It can also ping your Raptor to draw even more cards. Just great, great stuff. 2 copies of her. And then, rounding out all the spells, I have Lightning Strike as a 3-of. Glad to have this card back in Standard. I went back and forth between this or a Braid for removal. I chose Lightning Strike ultimately because it's slightly less circumstantial, and it's generally more versatile in Game 1 because it can hit players as well as creatures. And if they are playing a lot of artifacts, I have side options for that. So with the spells out of the way, let's take a look at the mana base. Running 23 lands total, which is slightly fewer than a typical mid-range deck, but we can afford it since there's so much acceleration. First off, another great addition from Ixalan, Unclaimed Territory. I remember playing with Cavern of Souls a few years ago from Avacyn Restored, and this is basically the exact same thing minus the uncounter ability, which is fine here since the main focus is the fixing. Obviously I have mostly dinosaurs in the deck, and all of the non-dino creatures are the early accelerants. They're all humans, so just 2 creature types total in the whole deck. And for the non-creatures, I just have the Lightning Strikes and Huatli, so the deck can definitely support a playset of this card. Then I have Aether Hub as a 3-of. Was running 4, but I pushed it down to 3 since I didn't want to pollute the mana base with too much generic mana. Overall though, it's a really good card. I didn't realize how good it was until I played with it. Basically it comes in untapped and can fix you for what you need to play that turn, or since the counters are permanent until you use them, it can just sit back until you need the colored mana. It adapts to your situation, which makes it very good. Now we start with the dual lands. I have 3 Inspiring Vantages. Very nice card to have, since turn 1 white is important for the collar. Then I have 4 copies of Rootbound Crag and 2 copies of Sunpetal Grove. They're decent to play turn 1 if you don't have the collar, and they do come in untapped a good amount of the time, since I also have 3 Sheltered Thickets and 2 Scattered Groves. They aren't shock lands, but they do have the basic land types, which helps out the other duels. These are also very good turn 1 plays if you don't have the collar, so you can go turn 1 tap land and turn 2 Crag or Grove and cast one of the 2 mana guys, so you'll still be on tempo. Also can be good for some card advantage if you don't need them. And then for basic lands, I have 1 forest and 1 mountain. And that is it for the main board. Let's take a look at the sideboard. First, I have 2 Harsh Mentor. Good effect, punishes in particular highly synergistic decks by dealing them damage. It's also a human, so that works well with mana base. It'll go in, and I'll usually take out a Huntmaster and a Drover, so the curve will stay the same. Next, I have another copy of Raging Swordtooth, mainly to bring in against the faster aggro decks to take out more of their little guys and be able to close the game out faster. Then I have another one of Shaper's Sanctuary. Very good, interesting new card, kind of similar to the Raptor in the main board, mainly in here against the control decks to be able to race them for card advantage. 3 Magma Spray is great side tech when you're up against aggro to exile their quick guys and stay alive to cast your bigger creatures. And I also have 3 copies of Fragmentize. Nice to have access to white for this card. It's just great. Destroys pretty much any artifact or enchantment for just 1 mana. Another great card to side in against aggro is Authority of the Consuls. I remember Blind Obedience from Gatecrash being a great card for White Weenie, and this is just an even better version of it. Comes down turn 1, haste doesn't work, it just wrecks their speed, their tempo, and it stalls them out long enough for me to trample over with dinosaurs a few turns later. And finally, I have another new card, Ashes of the Abhorrent, as a 2-of. Should be obvious why this is here, just to hate on and disrupt any kind of graveyard-based decks. So that's it for this deck tech. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to see more, check out my deck tech playlist and subscribe to our TappedOut page. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content.